Chapter 1. A Man in the Gilded Cage. The city of London was bathed in the warm glow of early autumn, the streets bustling with the usual mix of hurried footsteps and distant chatter. Yet, beneath the bustling surface, there was a tension, an unease, that hung in the air, much like the fog that occasionally crept in from the Thames. It was on this crisp, fog-kissed morning that Hercule Poirot found himself standing at the entrance of the Gilded Cage, a fashionable club located in the heart of the city, known for its opulence, exclusivity, and the peculiar way it catered to a very particular class of people. Poirot was not one to frequent places like the Gilded Cage. The members of its select crowd, always impeccably dressed and with their polished airs, were not the sort of people who typically caught his interest. But on this occasion he had been invited by none other than the club's owner, a man by the name of Jasper Harrington. Harrington was a figure of some renown in London society, wealthy, charming, and by most accounts rather enigmatic. His club, which had once been a modest affair catering to upper-class Londoners, had rapidly transformed into a glittering beacon of excess, attracting the city's elite and occasionally the curious. It was an invitation that Poirot could not refuse. He had been told that a most unusual problem had arisen within the club's gilded walls, one that even the brilliant minds of London's detectives could not unravel. As Poirot entered, his polished shoes making no sound on the thick Persian rug beneath him, he was greeted by the club's manager, a man who looked as though he had been carefully chosen for his ability to embody both elegance and restraint. "Mr. Poirot," the manager said with a polite bow, "welcome to the Gilded Cage. Mr. Harrington is expecting you." Poirot offered his customary bow in return, his moustache twitching ever so slightly. "Merci," he said, his voice smooth but with an edge of curiosity. "I do not think I am the usual sort of guest for such a place." The manager smiled thinly. "Perhaps not, sir, but I trust Mr. Harrington's invitation is not one to be taken lightly." The club was a masterpiece of design, with rich mahogany panelling, plush velvet chairs, and crystal chandeliers that seemed to glitter as though they were made of the finest diamonds. The patrons, both men and women, sat at tables that were small islands of conversation in the sea of luxury. A string quartet played in the corner, their music light and ethereal, adding to the atmosphere of decadence. Yet there was something about the atmosphere that felt strained. Poirot was led into a private room at the back of the club, its heavy oak door closing with a soft click behind him. At the far end of the room, standing by a large window that overlooked the city, was Jasper Harrington himself. He was tall, with silvered hair at his temples and sharp features that gave him an almost regal appearance. His tailored suit was impeccable, his manner confident, but there was something about him that seemed restless. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," Harrington said with a wide smile, turning to face him. "I am so pleased you could come. I must admit, I was beginning to worry that my invitation would be ignored." Poirot studied him closely, his keen eyes narrowing. "You are not the type to worry, Monsieur Harrington," he said with a small smile. "Yet I can tell that something has been troubling you. I do not believe this invitation was a mere formality." Harrington's smile faltered for a brief moment, and Poirot noticed a slight tension in his posture. "You are correct, monsieur. There is something wrong at the Gilded Cage. something that cannot be explained by normal means." He gestured for Poirot to sit, and the detective took the chair across from Harrington, folding his hands neatly in his lap. "I am listening. Monsieur, what is it that is troubling you?" Harrington's expression grew more serious as he began to speak, his voice low. "It started 2 weeks ago. A man arrived at the club, a new member. His name is Edward Caldwell. Well, let's just say he's an odd fellow. But he's wealthy, and I do not refuse the wealthy, Monsieur Poirot. However, since he joined, strange things have been happening." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "Strange things?" "Yes," Harrington said, pacing slightly as he spoke. "Caldwell has been behaving peculiarly. He spends hours in his private suite, never interacting with anyone. He's always alone. And then, last night, something even more disturbing happened." "What occurred last night?" Harrington's voice dropped lower. A scream that came from Caldwell's room. We rushed to investigate, of course, but when we arrived, the room was locked. No one was inside. The only thing we found was a strange object, a golden birdcage hanging from the ceiling. Poirot's mind immediately went to work, his eyes narrowing. "A golden birdcage?" Harrington nodded. "Yes, with intricate designs, but it was empty. Not a bird in sight. The strangest part, Monsieur Poirot, was the note inside the cage. It simply read, 'The gilded cage cannot hold me.'" Poirot's lips quirked into a slight smile. A cryptic message, a mystery indeed. "Yes," Harrington said, his eyes wide, "but it doesn't stop there. Every night since, Caldwell has been seen entering his room, and every morning he emerges as if nothing has happened. But last night he was different. He was agitated. He claimed he'd seen something moving in the cage." Poirot's sharp eyes never left Harrington's face. "And you believe him?" "I don't know what to believe any more," Harrington admitted. "But I've never seen him like this. He's terrified, and I fear." "Fear?" Poirot prompted. "Fear that Caldwell is not the only one who is trapped here, Monsieur Poirot," Harrington said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I fear that the gilded cage itself is becoming a prison for all of us." Poirot sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping gently on the armrest. "A prison?" he murmured. "Tell me more of this man Caldwell. What is his history? And why has he come to the gilded cage?" "I do not know much about him," Harrington replied, rubbing his hands together nervously. "He's a recluse, a man of means. But he's had some sort of trouble, something with his family, I think. I don't know the details, but I do know this. He's not like the other members of the Gilded Cage. He doesn't belong here." Poirot stood up suddenly, his eyes sharp with purpose. "I will speak with Monsieur Caldwell. I believe I can unravel the mystery of the Gilded Cage." As he turned to leave, Harrington's voice followed him. "Be careful, Monsieur Poirot. The cage may not let you go so easily." Poirot paused, turning back with a calm, almost amused expression. "Do not worry, Monsieur Harrington. I've never been one to be trapped by anything, be it a cage or a mystery." With that, he stepped out of the room, his mind already racing with questions, theories, and possibilities. The Gilded Cage had been designed to ensnare its members, but Poirot had no intention of becoming one of its prisoners. The game had begun. Chapter 2. The Unravelling Thread. Hercule Poirot's steps were measured as he walked through the luxurious corridors of the gilded cage. The thick velvet curtains framed the windows, casting shadows that seemed to dance across the marble floors. The opulence of the place had not escaped Poirot's keen eye, but his mind was entirely focused on the mystery at hand. He had been invited to this club by Jasper Harrington, but it was Caldwell's behaviour and the ominous note in the birdcage that now commanded his attention. Poirot's mind was already racing through the possibilities. What could it mean? The gilded cage was a symbol of wealth and privilege, but it could also be a metaphor for something far more sinister. The private suites of the club were isolated in a wing that was marked by a long hallway adorned with ancient paintings of London's aristocracy. Each suite was lavishly furnished, but it was clear to Poirot that luxury was only skin deep. There was an air of claustrophobia in the atmosphere, as though the rooms themselves were keeping their secrets. He approached Caldwell's suite, where the door was slightly ajar. With a sharp knock, Poirot called out, "Monsieur Caldwell, it is Hercule Poirot. May I come in?" There was a long silence, followed by the sound of footsteps. The door creaked open wider, and standing there was a man who, at first glance, appeared to be in his mid-40s. His hair, dark and unkempt, framed a face that seemed both worn and gaunt. His clothes, while expensive, looked as though they had been hastily thrown together. The man's eyes were wide, his pupils dilated with a sense of anxiety that was impossible to ignore. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," Caldwell said in a voice that trembled slightly. "I've been expecting you. Please, come in." Poirot nodded and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, with heavy curtains drawn against the outside world. The walls were adorned with rich tapestries, and the furniture was grand, but there was something off about the entire space. The most striking feature was the large birdcage that hung in the corner of the room, its golden frame gleaming under the low light. "Is this the cage?" Poirot asked, his voice calm but sharp as he pointed to it. Caldwell nodded, his hands twitching nervously. "Yes, it arrived the night. Everything changed. It's not just a decoration, Monsieur Poirot. It moves." Poirot studied the cage, taking in its intricate design. The bars were adorned with tiny, delicate engravings of leaves and flowers, and the bottom of the cage was lined with soft velvet, but it was empty. There were no birds, no movement, nothing to suggest that it could be more than an ornate piece of furniture. "I do not understand, Monsieur Caldwell," Poirot said. "What do you mean by 'it moves'?" Caldwell's eyes darted around the room, as though expecting someone to appear from the shadows. I know how it sounds, but I've seen it. I've seen the cage shift, just slightly. At night, sometimes it swings, as though something inside it is trying to escape." Poirot's expression remained neutral. "And you believe something is inside?" "I don't know," Caldwell said, his voice cracking. "But I've heard things. Whispers, voices. The cage, it seems to be calling to me." Poirot stepped closer too, the cage, inspecting it carefully. There was no indication that anything had been tampered with, no sign of movement. "You are quite certain of what you have heard?" "I am not mad, Monsieur Poirot," Caldwell insisted, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. I have been seeing things, shadows in the corners of the room, strange dreams. I can't explain it. I've never been one to believe in superstition or nonsense, but this is different." Poirot took a step back, his sharp eyes never leaving Caldwell. "Monsieur Caldwell, I assure you, I do not believe you are mad. But there are explanations that do not require the supernatural. I intend to find one." Caldwell collapsed onto a nearby chair, his hands shaking as he clasped them together. "Please, Monsieur Poirot, I don't know what to do. I feel trapped, as though I cannot escape. The Gilded Cage, it's become more than just a name." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps. But I must ask you, monsieur, what you know of your past. Have you any enemies? Anyone who might wish you harm?" Caldwell looked up, his face clouded with confusion. "Enemies? No. I've always kept to myself, my family. I've not spoken to them in years. There's nothing in my past that could explain this." Poirot's mind whirred with possibilities, each one more curious than the last. There was something Caldwell wasn't telling him, something buried beneath the surface. "I see," Poirot said slowly. "Then I must investigate further. I will need your full cooperation, Monsieur Caldwell. Do not worry. I will uncover the truth." As Poirot turned to leave, Caldwell called out to him. "One more thing, Monsieur Poirot. The note, the one inside the cage, it said, 'The Gilded Cage cannot hold me.' Do you think that means something?" Poirot paused in the doorway, his hand resting on the knob. "That is precisely what I intend to find out, Monsieur Caldwell. Do not worry. The truth will come to light." The following evening Poirot returned to the Gilded Cage, this time alone. He had spent the day gathering information about Caldwell, speaking with members of the club, and examining the note found in the birdcage. The more he learned, the more curious the case became. There were rumours surrounding Caldwell, whispers of a past that didn't quite fit together, and a strange air of mystery that clung to him like a shadow. Poirot approached Harrington's office, where the club's owner was waiting for him. Harrington looked tired, his face drawn with worry. "Monsieur Poirot, have you found anything?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "Ah, Monsieur Harrington," Poirot said with his characteristic calm, "I have learned many things, but there is still much to unravel. What I know for certain is that Caldwell is not as he seems. There is a secret here, one that has been hidden for many years." Harrington's face grew pale. "A secret? What kind of secret?" Poirot looked him in the eye. "That, Monsieur Harrington, is precisely what I intend to uncover. But I will need your help. The Gilded Cage holds more than just wealth and power. It holds its own mysteries." As Poirot left the office, the weight of the case pressed down on him. The birdcage was more than just a peculiar object. It was a symbol, a puzzle with many pieces yet to be placed, and the key to unlocking it lay within the walls of the Gilded Cage itself. Later that night, Poirot sat in his hotel room, piecing together the fragments of the case. Caldwell's strange behaviour, the cryptic note, the mysterious birdcage, everything pointed to a deeper mystery, one that had yet to reveal its true face. But Poirot's mind, ever sharp, was already beginning to formulate a theory. The clues were there, waiting to be uncovered. The Gilded Cage was not merely a club, It was a prison of its own making, a place where the past and present collided, where secrets were kept behind gilded bars, and Hercule Poirot would stop at nothing to reveal them. Chapter 3. The Shadow in the Glass. The fog was thick when Poirot returned to the gilded cage the following day, wrapping the city in an almost suffocating embrace. It seemed to mirror the oppressive atmosphere within the club, where secrets lingered like ghosts, refusing to be exorcised. Poirot arrived early, before the members had fully settled in for their usual morning routines. The grandeur of the gilded cage, as magnificent as it was, felt unnervingly silent at this hour, and the heavy air seemed to hum with the anticipation of something about to unfold. He had spent the previous evening combing through every detail. He could gather, revisiting the club's history, Caldwell's past, and the cryptic nature of the birdcage. Yet, despite all his efforts, he still felt as if he were standing at the edge of a precipice, waiting for the next step to reveal itself. The door to Caldwell's suite was closed, but Poirot had already made arrangements to meet with the man. Again. After all, it was Caldwell who had invited the mystery into the club, and it was Caldwell who held the key to unravelling it. A soft knock on the door brought a quiet reply from within. Poirot entered, his eyes quickly scanning the room. Caldwell was sitting by the window, staring out into the foggy expanse beyond, his back to the detective. The birdcage still hung in the corner, untouched and unchanged, yet it seemed to be drawing Poirot's attention like a magnet. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," Caldwell said, his voice low and weary. "You've come again. I suppose you think I'm mad, don't you?" Poirot moved towards him, his steps slow and measured. "I think, Monsieur Caldwell, that you are frightened. There is a difference." Caldwell's face twisted with a mixture of frustration and shame. "I don't know how much more of this I can take. Every night I hear things, whispers, shadows, moving where there should be none. I've stopped sleeping. I haven't been able to close my eyes in days." Poirot took a seat across from Caldwell, his sharp eyes never leaving the man's face. "What you have told me is troubling, monsieur, but tell me, what do you remember of the first time you heard these whispers? Was it before or after you came to the gilded cage?" Caldwell's eyes flickered. I don't know any more. It all feels like a blur. But I remember the day I arrived here. It was a strange feeling, as though I was being drawn to the club by something I couldn't see, something I couldn't understand. The birdcage, too, arrived the very night I came. I thought nothing of it at first. It seemed like just another luxurious touch to add to the opulence of this place. Poirot raised an eyebrow, his voice steady. "But now you are not so sure." Caldwell shook his head slowly. "No, there's something wrong about it. The way it moves, the way it feels as though it's alive. I cannot explain it, but it's as if the cage itself is watching me." Poirot looked towards the cage, his eyes narrowing as he examined its structure once more. The fine craftsmanship was undeniable, the golden bars glinting faintly in the dim light. Yet there was something unsettling about it. He could not ignore the symbolism, how the gilded cage was both beautiful and a prison, an object of desire that trapped its captive. "Monsieur Caldwell," Poirot said, leaning forward slightly. "You spoke of a past, a family. What happened to your family?" You mentioned that you had not spoken to them in years. Was there a reason for that?" Caldwell's expression faltered, and for a brief moment Poirot saw a flicker of pain cross his face. "My family, they're gone. My father passed away years ago, and my mother, she disappeared shortly after. It's all a mess of unresolved questions. But it doesn't matter anymore. What matters now is that I'm here, and something is happening to me. I don't know who or what is behind it, but I need to know why it's happening." Poirot's mind was racing. Family, disappearance, the birdcage, the whispers. Everything seemed to fit together in an odd, jumbled puzzle, but it was missing a piece. "And what about your past, Monsieur Caldwell?" Poirot continued. "Have you ever had any dealings with the supernatural? Any involvement with mystics, seers, or occult matters?" Caldwell's lips pressed together in a thin line. "No, I'm not one for such things. But recently, I found myself unable to escape the feeling that I'm being pulled into something I don't understand. I've been researching the club's history, trying to find out if there's any connection to what's happening to me, but I haven't found anything concrete." Poirot sat back in his chair, contemplating Caldwell's words. The man's demeanour suggested he was telling the truth, or at least he believed he was. But Poirot's intuition told him that there was more to this story. Much more. "The club's history," Poirot murmured thoughtfully. "Yes, I too have been looking into it. The Gilded Cage has had many owners over the years, each more mysterious than the last. But there is one in particular who stands out. Your predecessor, Monsieur Caldwell, a man named Lord Harold Blackwood." Caldwell looked up, his brow furrowing. "Lord Blackwood? I've never heard of him." Poirot's lips curled into a small smile. "That, Monsieur Caldwell, is the part of the puzzle that interests me. Lord Blackwood was the owner of the Gilded Cage nearly a century ago. He was known for his eccentricities, his obsession with rare and valuable objects. But it is said that, before his disappearance, he was seen frequently consulting a mysterious birdcage, one very similar to the one you now own." Caldwell's face grew pale. "What do you mean, disappearance? He vanished?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Indeed. One day Lord Blackwood simply disappeared. No one knows where he went or why. His fortune was left behind, but his personal belongings, his journals, his correspondence, were all destroyed in a fire shortly after his disappearance. It is said that before he vanished, he spoke of hearing voices from within the cage." Caldwell stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This can't be true. This is all just coincidence." Poirot remained seated, his gaze unwavering. "Coincidence? Perhaps. But I believe that your family's history is tied to the Gilded Cage, and I believe that the cage is the key to unlocking this mystery." Caldwell's eyes were wild, his hands trembling. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of it." Poirot rose to his feet, his posture calm and authoritative. "I understand, monsieur, but this is no longer just about you. It is about something far older, something that has been hidden for many years. The cage is calling to you, and I intend to find out why." That evening, Poirot spent hours combing through the records of the Gilded Cage, searching for any connection between Caldwell's family and Lord Blackwood. It seemed that every path he followed only led to more questions, more mystery. But Poirot's mind was like a steel trap, and he was not about to let the case slip away. It was only after midnight when he finally uncovered something that made his blood run cold. A letter, dated from over 25 years ago, addressed to Caldwell's father. The letter was from none other than Lord Blackwood himself. The letter was brief, cryptic, and chilling in its implications. The cage is not merely a trap, it is a legacy. It chooses its own. The one who possesses it cannot escape. You and your son are bound to it, as I was. The curse is real, and it cannot be undone. Poirot's heart quickened as he read the words. The puzzle was coming together, piece by piece. Caldwell was right. He was trapped in something far older than he realized. And now it was up to Poirot to find a way to break the cycle. Chapter 4. The weight of the past. Poirot sat at his desk in the dim light of his hotel room, the letter from Lord Blackwood lying in front of him like a grim omen. The words echoed in his mind. The cage is not merely a trap. It is a legacy. It chooses its own. The one who possesses it cannot escape. You and your son are bound to it, as I was. The curse is real, and it cannot be undone. It was a message steeped in foreboding, and yet Poirot knew that these were no mere words. Lord Blackwood's warning carried weight, and the sense of inevitability in the letter could not be ignored. What had Caldwell stumbled upon? What had his family become entangled in? The image of the gilded cage filled Poirot's thoughts. It was no ordinary object. It was, as Blackwood had said, a legacy, one that had endured through generations. The cage was more than a symbol of wealth. It was a catalyst, a force that had drawn Caldwell and his family into its web. And now, it seemed, Caldwell was struggling to break free from something that had already bound him in ways he could not comprehend. The detective's mind was sharp, cutting through the haze of uncertainty. He had to understand the origins of the cage, its true purpose. And to do that, he needed to delve deeper into the club's history, Caldwell's family, and the strange connection between the two. The clock ticked, its rhythm steady and deliberate, as Poirot wrote in his journal. Each entry was a piece of the puzzle, a clue that would eventually form the picture of the mystery. He had made progress, but there was still much to uncover. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on his door. He rose swiftly, his body moving with the precision of a man who had spent years cultivating habits of efficiency. When he opened the door, he found himself face to face with Jasper Harrington, the owner of the Gilded Cage. Monsieur Poirot? Harrington greeted him, his face lined with concern. I hope I'm not disturbing you, but there's something I must speak to you about. Poirot stepped aside, ushering Harrington into the room. Of course, Monsieur Harrington. What brings you here at this hour? Harrington hesitated, glancing nervously over his shoulder as though expecting someone to be listening. It's Caldwell. I'm afraid he's in great danger. Poirot's interest piqued at once. Danger, you say? Please, tell me more. Harrington took a deep breath, settling into the chair opposite Poirot. I've known Caldwell for years, ever since he inherited the club. He's always been a quiet man, reserved even. But in the past few days, something's changed. He's become erratic. I've seen him pacing the halls, muttering to himself. His eyes are wild with fear. I'm not sure what's going on, but I fear for his safety." Poirot's expression remained neutral as he listened intently. "You believe this is related to the cage?" Harrington nodded. "Yes, he's convinced that the cage is alive, that it's somehow controlling him. He's been researching it obsessively, and it's driving him to the edge. I'm worried that he might do something desperate." Poirot steepled his fingers, considering the implications of Harrington's words. "This is very troubling indeed, but it is not enough to merely be worried, Monsieur Harrington. We must understand what has brought Caldwell to this point." Harrington shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I don't know what more I can do. I've tried to talk to him, to reason with him, but he's beyond listening. He insists that there's something in the cage, something he can't see, but something that's calling to him." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this cage, Monsieur Harrington, what is its history? How long has it been in the club?" Harrington looked at the floor, clearly uneasy. "The cage has been here longer than I have. It was a part of the original collection of Lord Blackwood, though I'm not sure when it arrived. I've never been able to find any record of it. The only thing I know for sure is that it's always been here. It's always been a part of the club." Poirot stood up and moved to the window, his gaze distant. "A part of the club? Yes, I believe that is the key. The cage is not merely a piece of furniture. It is the very soul of the club, the thing that binds it together. But what is it that it seeks? What is it that Caldwell is being drawn toward?" Harrington shook his head, his face pale. "I wish I knew, Poirot, but I fear that whatever it is, it has taken hold of him in a way that cannot be undone. The more he looks into the cage, the more he becomes obsessed. I've seen him in the middle of the night, staring at it for hours, his eyes wide with fear and fascination. It's as if he's under some kind of spell." Poirot turned from the window, his gaze sharp. "A spell? I do not believe in spells, Monsieur Harrington, but I do believe in the power of the mind. The cage may not be the source of Caldwell's torment, but it is certainly the focal point. It is drawing him in, manipulating his thoughts and emotions." Harrington leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Then what can we do, Poirot? How can we help him?" Poirot smiled thinly, his expression calculating. "We must understand the nature of the cage, Monsieur Harrington. Only then will we be able to free Caldwell from its grip. I will need to examine it again carefully. I will also need access to the club's archives, anything that might shed light on its history." Harrington nodded quickly. "Of course, anything you need." Poirot's eyes glittered with resolve. "Good. Then we shall begin immediately. The answer lies within the cage's past. It is not just an object. It is a link to something far older, far darker." The next morning, Poirot arrived at the Gilded Cage with renewed purpose. Harrington had arranged for him to have access to the club's private archives, and Poirot intended to make the most of it. The musty scent of old leather and yellowing paper filled the air as he sifted through the records. There were mentions of various owners, notable events, and even a few documents that hinted at the club's mysterious reputation. But it was the records concerning Lord Blackwood that caught his attention. The more he read, the more the picture began to form. Blackwood's obsession with rare and exotic objects was well known. But what stood out most were the recurring mentions of a mysterious artifact, a birdcage which seemed to have a strange hold over him. It was said that Blackwood's obsession with the cage began after a trip to the East, where he had acquired it from a collector. The records were vague on the specifics of the transaction, but the implication was clear. The cage had come from a far-off land, one steeped in mystery and legend. The mention of curses, dark rituals, and forbidden knowledge were woven throughout Blackwood's journals, leading Poirot to believe that the cage's true origins were far more sinister than anyone had imagined. As Poirot carefully examined the documents, one entry in particular caught his eye. It was a letter, dated shortly before Blackwood's disappearance, addressed to an unknown recipient. The letter read, "The cage calls to me, as it has to others before me. It is not a simple object. It is a vessel of power. I can feel it, pulling at my soul, urging me to open it. I fear what I might find, but I cannot stop myself. Perhaps you will understand when you see it. The cage has claimed me, just as it has claimed those before me. There is no escape." Poirot's mind raced. Blackwood had been consumed by the cage, just as Caldwell now was. The cycle had repeated itself, but it could still be broken. The question was, how? He closed the letter and stood up, his resolve strengthening. He knew what he had to do. The cage was the key, and Caldwell was its latest victim. But there was one thing that Poirot was certain of. He would not allow the past to repeat itself. The gilded cage would reveal its secrets, and Poirot would see to it that Caldwell was freed from its grip. The detective had always prided himself on solving the most intricate of mysteries. This one would be no different. Chapter 5. The Shadows Behind the Bars. The gilded cage had never seemed so imposing, so full of secrets as it did now. Poirot stood in front of the cage once again, his sharp gaze scanning its every detail. He could feel its presence in the room, like a weight that pressed down on everything, suffocating the air itself. Caldwell had once been enthralled by its beauty, its opulence. But now, as Poirot gazed at it, he could see what had truly made it dangerous. It was not merely a possession. It was a trap. With a deep breath, Poirot turned away from the cage, his mind focused on the task at hand. Caldwell was not in the club this morning. Harrington had informed Poirot that he had locked himself in his private chambers, refusing to speak to anyone. The detective had suspected this would happen, but now it was time to confront Caldwell once more, to unravel the final layers of this mystery. Time was running out. Caldwell's grip on reality was slipping, and Poirot could not afford to wait any longer. "I must speak with him," Poirot muttered to himself, his voice low and resolute. Harrington, who had been hovering in the doorway, stepped forward. His face was etched with concern. "I've tried, Poirot. He won't listen to anyone, not even me. I'm afraid he's beyond help." Poirot fixed him with a determined look. "No one is beyond help, Monsieur Harrington. We must not give up on him yet." Harrington looked sceptical, but he nodded. "Very well, but be careful. He's not the same man he was when he first arrived here. The cage, it's changed him." Poirot gave a small, reassuring smile. "I have faced many mysteries, Monsieur Harrington. This is but one more." With that, Poirot made his way through the corridors of the club, his footsteps light but purposeful. The walls seemed to close in on him as he approached Caldwell's chambers. The air was thick with tension, and Poirot's instincts told him that something was amiss, something that even Caldwell didn't fully understand. He knocked softly on the door. "Monsieur Caldwell, it is Hercule Poirot. I would like to speak with you." There was no answer at first. Poirot waited, his mind working rapidly to anticipate the next step. Then he heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching from within. The door creaked open, revealing Caldwell, his face pale and drawn, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. His appearance was a stark contrast to the confident, charismatic man Poirot had first encountered. "I told you I didn't want to speak to anyone." Caldwell's voice was shaky, tinged with desperation. Poirot remained calm, his expression unshifting. "I understand, monsieur, but I believe it is not just your own well-being that is at stake. I believe it is your family's as well." Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by that?" Poirot stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "I believe that you are not the first person in your family to be affected by this curse, if I may call it that. The cage you have inherited, it is no mere object. It is a symbol of something far darker, something that has been passed down through generations. Your father, your grandfather, each one of them like you, was drawn into its grip." Caldwell recoiled, his face a mixture of disbelief and fear. "My family? What do you know about them?" Poirot's gaze softened, his tone measured. "I know that your father, too, struggled with the cage. He could not escape it. It took hold of him just as it has taken hold of you." Caldwell looked away, his hands trembling. "My father disappeared. You think he was taken by the cage too?" Poirot nodded slowly. "I do not believe it is a mere coincidence, monsieur. There is something insidious about the way the cage draws in its victims, something that has persisted through the generations." Caldwell's breathing quickened. "But why me? Why now?" Poirot's voice was steady. "Because, Monsieur Caldwell, you were always meant to take its place. The cage chooses its own, and you, like your ancestors, have been chosen." Caldwell's shoulders sagged as if the weight of Poirot's words had crushed him. He sank down onto the chair by the window, his hands clasped in his lap. "I don't want this. I never asked for it." Poirot sat across from him, his eyes never leaving Caldwell's face. "I understand, but it is not too late, monsieur. There is still a way to break the cycle. We can free you from the cage's grasp." Caldwell lifted his head, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "You really think so?" Poirot smiled gently. "I know so. But first, we must understand the true nature of the cage. We must understand its origins and the power it holds." There was a long pause, and Caldwell looked hesitant. "I've tried to understand it. I've looked into the history of the Gilded Cage, tried to find answers in its past, but nothing makes sense. I keep hearing voices. They come from the cage. I've heard them for days now, whispering to me, calling my name." Poirot's brow furrowed. "Voices! Tell me more about these voices." Caldwell's hands shook as he spoke, his words tumbling out in a rush. "It's like something inside the cage is alive. I hear it calling to me, telling me things. It speaks of secrets, of things long buried. It tells me that I am part of something larger than I can comprehend, that I must obey, that I must open the cage." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "Monsieur Caldwell, do you remember the letter I showed you? The one from Lord Blackwood?" Caldwell nodded weakly. "Yes, I remember. But what does that have to do with me?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "It has everything to do with you. Lord Blackwood, too, heard the voices. He, too, believed that the cage had a will of its own. And just as you are now hearing its whispers, so did Blackwood before his disappearance. But you, Monsieur Caldwell, have a choice. You do not have to succumb to its power. There is another way." Caldwell looked at Poirot, his eyes filled with both fear and disbelief. "What choice? How can I possibly break free from something that has controlled my family for generations?" Poirot's voice was steady. "The first step is understanding, monsieur. The cage does not have power over you unless you allow it. You must confront it, face it head on. Only then will you be free." Caldwell's eyes glimmered with a faint spark of hope, but his voice remained doubtful. "And what if I cannot face it? What if it's too late?" Poirot smiled, a flicker of reassurance in his eyes. "Then I will be there, monsieur. You are not alone in this. Together we will unravel the mystery and end the curse." For a long moment, Caldwell remained silent, his hands clenched tightly. But then, finally, he stood up, his shoulders straightening, with renewed determination. "All right, Poirot, I will face it. I will face the cage." Poirot nodded, his voice resolute. "Good. We begin now, Monsieur Caldwell. We end this once and for all." That afternoon, Poirot and Caldwell returned to the Gilded Cage. The club was eerily quiet, the sound of the members' laughter and chatter a distant memory. It was as though the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. As Poirot and Caldwell approached the cage, the air grew thick with tension. The whispers that Caldwell had spoken of seemed to hang in the air, faint but unmistakable. The detective's eyes never left the golden bars as he stepped closer. "To the cage. Are you ready, monsieur?" Poirot asked. Caldwell's gaze was fixed on the cage, his face pale but resolute. "I think so, but I'm afraid." Poirot placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent reassurance. "Fear is natural, but it will not control you. Together, we will open this door." The two men stood in front of the cage, their resolve firm. Poirot took a deep breath, preparing himself for whatever lay ahead. The final act of the mystery had begun. Chapter 6. Breaking the Chains. The gilded cage loomed. Before them, its intricate golden bars reflecting the faint light of the room in an almost ethereal glow. The cage, once a symbol of opulence and power, now felt like a tomb, a prison that threatened to consume everything in its path. Poirot stood still, his eyes locked on the object that had ensnared Caldwell, and perhaps many others before him. Beside him, Caldwell breathed shallowly, his hands trembling as he reached out, hovering just inches from the cage. "I'm ready, Poirot," Caldwell murmured, his voice a mixture of dread and determination. "Let's end this." Poirot turned to him, his eyes filled with a quiet assurance. Remember, monsieur, this is not the cage that holds you. It is your fear, your hesitation. You must confront it, as you would confront a shadow. Only then will you break free. Caldwell nodded slowly, though his expression betrayed his inner turmoil. He took a deep breath, stepping forward, and his fingers brushed lightly against the gilded bars. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was still, and the faint whispers Caldwell had spoken of before seemed to vanish, as though the cage itself was waiting, watching. Poirot, however, remained vigilant. His mind was sharp, alert to every nuance of the situation. He knew that the cage, in whatever form it had taken, was not a simple object of art. It was a conduit, a mechanism designed to draw in its victims and to feed on their deepest fears. Caldwell's struggle was not with the cage alone. It was with the darkness that had been awakened inside him, a darkness that had been building for years. The room seemed to grow colder as Caldwell stood there, his hand still on the bars. The faint whispers returned, and Poirot could see the change in Caldwell's demeanour, his shoulders tensed, his body becoming rigid as if he were fighting an invisible force. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his face twisted in an expression of both terror and determination. Poirot stepped closer, his voice calm but insistent. Caldwell, do not let the cage control you. The whispers are but echoes of your own fear. The cage cannot hold you unless you allow it. Caldwell's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment it seemed as though he might break free. His grip on the bars tightened, and his face flushed with the effort. I can't. It's too much. It's pulling me in, Poirot. I can't stop it. Poirot's voice remained steady, his words cutting through the haze of fear that enveloped Caldwell. It is not the cage that pulls you, monsieur. It is your own mind that you must master. The cage is but an illusion. It can only control you if you let it. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if the cage itself were alive, reacting to Poirot's words. Caldwell's body trembled, but his eyes remained focused on the golden bars. He was struggling, but there was a spark in his gaze now, a glimmer of resistance. Poirot knew that this was the turning point. This was the moment when Caldwell's resolve would be tested, when he would either succumb to the fear or rise above. Think, monsieur, Poirot continued, his voice soft but powerful. The cage is not a trap of iron and gold. It is a trap of your own making. It feeds on doubt, on the belief that it holds power over you. But you are the master of your fate. You must not let it define you. For a moment, the room fell silent. The whispers ceased, and Caldwell's trembling hand slowly loosened its grip on the bars. His body relaxed, and his breathing, though still shallow, became more even. His eyes, which had been wide with terror, began to narrow with focus. He stood tall, a new sense of purpose flooding through him. He had made the choice. Poirot stepped back, watching Caldwell with quiet approval. That is it, monsieur. You have taken the first step. Now, you must understand the truth of the cage. Caldwell's voice was hoarse, but steady. The truth? Poirot nodded. The cage is not what it seems. It is not a physical object that holds power over you. It is a manifestation of the fears, the desires, the regrets that reside within. It is the legacy of those who have come before you. but it is not indestructible. The past does not have to control you. You must free yourself from its grip." Caldwell looked at the cage once more, and this time his gaze was filled not with fear, but with clarity. He took a step back, and then another, distancing himself from the object that had held him captive for so long. "You're right," Caldwell said, his voice stronger now. "I've been letting it control me. All these years I've been running from the past, from the things I couldn't change. But I can't keep hiding anymore. I can't keep living in its shadow." Poirot smiled, his expression both proud and understanding. "Exactly, monsieur. You are no longer a prisoner of the past. You are free." Caldwell turned to face Poirot, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. If I hadn't come to you, I would have lost myself completely." Poirot shook his head gently. "It is you, monsieur, who did the work. I merely showed you the way." The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the moment settling over them. Caldwell had broken free from the cage, but Poirot knew that there was still much to be done. The past had not been erased. It would never be forgotten. But Caldwell had taken control of his future, and that, in itself, was a victory. As they stood there, a distant sound reached their ears, a faint creaking, followed by the soft sound of something heavy shifting. Both men turned toward the cage, and for a moment the air seemed to thicken, as though the object itself were reacting to the change in Caldwell's demeanour. The golden bars shimmered in the dim light, and then, slowly, they began to move. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. Something was happening. The cage was not simply going to relinquish its hold so easily. There was still something within it, something that had been dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. "Do not let your guard down, monsieur," Poirot warned, his voice low. "There is more to this mystery than meets the eye." Caldwell's expression hardened. "I understand. What do we do now?" Poirot stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the cage. "We finish what we started. We must face whatever lies within, once and for all." With a deep breath, the two men approached the cage together, united in their resolve. The whispers had stopped, but the tension in the air was palpable. It was clear now that the cage held secrets far darker than anyone could have imagined. But Poirot was undaunted. The truth was within their grasp, and he would stop at nothing to uncover it. With careful hands, Poirot reached for the latch of the cage. As it opened, the golden bars creaked, and the room seemed to exhale, as though the very walls had been holding their breath. The final chapter of the mystery was about to unfold. Chapter 7. The Hidden Truth. The latch clicked open with a soft, almost ominous sound, reverberating through the tense silence of the room. The golden bars of the gilded cage, once pristine, now looked as though they had aged with time, their shine dulled, but still casting a faint, ethereal glow in the dim light. Poirot and Caldwell stood before it, their eyes locked on the mysterious cage, each of them aware that the truth they sought lay hidden within. Poirot took a careful step forward, his gaze never wavering from the cage. The room had grown unnaturally cold, and the air seemed thick with anticipation. The whispers, those eerie voices that Caldwell had heard, were gone now, replaced by an unsettling stillness. It was as though The very room was waiting, holding its breath for whatever was about to unfold. "Are you certain about this, monsieur?" Poirot asked softly, his voice steady, though there was an edge of caution in his words. Caldwell, standing slightly behind Poirot, nodded. His face was pale, but there was a new strength in his eyes, an unspoken resolve that had not been there before. "I have to face it, Poirot. I've spent years running from the past, from the things I couldn't change, but if I don't confront this now, I'll never be free." Poirot smiled slightly, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "That is the first step toward freedom, Monsieur Caldwell. Facing the truth, no matter how difficult it may be." Caldwell took a deep breath and stepped closer to the cage, his hand hovering near the opening. For a long moment, neither man moved, as if they were both waiting for something, a sign perhaps, or some hint of what lay inside. Then, with a quiet resolve, Caldwell pulled the doors of the gilded cage open wide. The cage, though empty, seemed to pulse with an almost palpable energy, as though it were alive with secrets. The air around it seemed to shimmer, and for a brief moment Caldwell swore he saw something flicker inside, the outline of a figure, a shadow that danced just beyond the edge of his vision. His heart skipped a beat, and he instinctively took a step back, but Poirot's steady hand on his shoulder held him in place. "Do not be afraid, monsieur," Poirot said softly, his voice a calming presence in the tense atmosphere. "The cage may seem alive, but it is not the object itself that holds power over you. It is the fear, the memories that have been bound to it." Caldwell nodded, his grip tightening on the edges of the cage. His fingers were cold, but his determination had solidified into something more powerful than fear. He would not let this curse define him any longer. "Let us see what it is that haunts you, monsieur," Poirot continued, his eyes scanning the inside of the cage. "Only by understanding the past can we free you from its grip." They both stepped forward, and as they crossed the threshold of the cage, a strange sensation washed over them. The room seemed to distort slightly, as though the very space they occupied was being altered. The golden bars shimmered again, and suddenly they were no longer in the club's private room. Instead, they found themselves standing in a dark, fog-filled landscape, a place that felt both familiar and utterly alien. The faint outlines of trees loomed in the distance, and the sky overhead was an oppressive shade of grey, as though a storm were brewing just beyond the horizon. Caldwell's breath caught in his throat. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Poirot's eyes darted around the strange landscape, his mind already working to make sense of what he was seeing. "This is no ordinary place, monsieur. This is a projection of the past, a memory perhaps, a place where the events tied to the cage were born." Caldwell's face twisted in confusion. "But how? How can this be?" Poirot looked at him, his expression calm but filled with quiet understanding. "The cage is not simply an object. It is a vessel, a conduit for the emotions, the regrets, the memories of those who have come before. It holds the weight of their actions, and in doing so, it creates a space where the past can live on, a place where it cannot be forgotten." Caldwell took a step forward, his gaze now fixed on the horizon. "Is this where it all began? Where my father, where my grandfather were lost?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, This is where the cage's curse began. This is where the darkness first took root. The fog thickened, swirling around their feet as though it were alive. Caldwell could feel the weight of the air, pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He wanted to turn away, to escape, but something within him held him there. Some force stronger than fear, stronger than the urge to flee. And then, through the fog, a figure emerged. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark, old-fashioned clothing. His face was obscured by the mist, but Caldwell knew instantly who it was. It was his father, standing there frozen in time, just as he had been before his disappearance. "Father," Caldwell breathed, his voice shaking. "Is it really you?" The figure did not move, its face hidden from view. It was as though the memory of his father had been trapped here, suspended in this place, unable to escape. Poirot's voice cut through the stillness. "Do not approach him, monsieur. What you see is not truly your father. It is an echo, a manifestation of the past." Caldwell hesitated but took a step closer, his eyes never leaving the figure. "But I have to understand. I have to know what happened." Poirot placed a gentle hand on his arm. "The past is a shadow, monsieur. It can only be understood when viewed from a distance. To approach it too closely is to risk being swallowed by it." For a moment, Caldwell remained still, his gaze locked on the figure, and then, as if recognizing the truth in Poirot's words, he stepped back, his shoulders slumping with the weight of the realization. "I've been chasing shadows all this time, trying to make sense of something that can never be understood in the way I want." Poirot nodded. "That is the danger of the cage, monsieur. It convinces you that you must confront the past, that you must understand it fully. But the truth is, the past is not meant to be understood. It is meant to be accepted, and then let go." Caldwell turned to face Poirot, his expression filled with newfound clarity. "So this cage, it's been holding my family in place. My father's obsession with it, his disappearance, it all started here." "Yes," Poirot said, his voice low, "but it does not have to continue. You are the key to breaking this cycle. The past does not have to control you, monsieur. The cage is merely a reflection of the past's hold over you. But you can release yourself from it." Caldwell looked back at the figure of his father, now slowly dissolving into the fog, as though it were being erased by time. "I don't know if I can. The past is too powerful." Poirot smiled softly, his eyes filled with quiet confidence. "You already have, monsieur. You have faced the truth, and that is the first step. The rest will come in time." As the fog began to lift, the strange landscape faded away, and the two men found themselves back in the club's private room, standing before the gilded cage. The room felt lighter now, the oppressive weight of the air having lifted. Caldwell stood still for a moment, his hand resting on the edge of the cage, as if anchoring himself to the present. "Is it over?" Caldwell asked, his voice almost incredulous. Poirot nodded. "Yes, monsieur. The cage no longer holds you. You are free." Caldwell took a deep, steadying breath. For the first time in years, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The past, with all its pain and regret, was no longer a prison. "Thank you, Poirot," Caldwell said quietly. "You've given me my life back." Poirot gave a small, approving smile. "It was you, monsieur, who freed yourself. I merely helped you see the way." As they stood there, the gilded cage behind them, it was clear that the mystery was not simply about solving a puzzle. It was about understanding oneself, confronting one's past, and finding the strength to move forward. The case was closed, but for Caldwell, the real journey had only just begun. Chapter 8. The final unravelling. The gilded cage had been silenced, its influence over Caldwell broken. Yet, as Poirot stood there, quietly observing his companion, he knew that the journey was far from over. The cage, now emptied of its ominous power, had revealed much, but it had also hidden many secrets, some of which would take time to fully comprehend. The room was still, and for a fleeting moment it felt as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Caldwell, still standing by the cage, ran a hand through his hair, his face pale but free of the haunted look that had marred it before. He had faced the past, confronted his family's legacy, and come out the other side. But the question that remained was whether he could truly leave it behind. The past, after all, had a way of creeping back into the present, no matter how firmly one tried to close the door on it. "Well, Monsieur Poirot," Caldwell said, his voice quieter than before, "it seems we have uncovered the truth, but I'm not sure I fully understand what it means. I thought I'd be free after confronting that thing, but now it feels as though something else is still pulling at me." Poirot turned to him, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Monsieur Caldwell, you have taken the first step toward freedom, but freedom is a complex thing. It is not merely the absence of the past. It is the ability to live in the present without its chains." Caldwell nodded slowly, but there was a lingering doubt in his eyes. "I want to believe that, but there are still so many unanswered questions. My father's disappearance, the obsession with the cage, the whispers, it doesn't make sense. It feels like the pieces don't fit together." Poirot smiled, his expression calm and knowing. "Ah, but that is the beauty of it, monsieur. The mystery does not end when you think you have all the answers. It only evolves. Perhaps you have not yet seen the full picture. We are still missing a few key pieces, no?" Caldwell's brow furrowed. "You think there's more to this?" "I do," Poirot replied, his voice steady. "The cage, the past, the whispers, they are all part of a much larger puzzle. But we must look beyond the surface, monsieur. We must search for the thread that connects them all." Caldwell exhaled sharply, feeling a weight settle on his chest once more. "I don't know if I can keep going, Poirot. I thought I was done with this curse. But now I'm not so sure." Poirot placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Monsieur, you are not alone in this. We will uncover the truth together, one step at a time. You must trust yourself now, as much as you trust the process. And remember, answers often come when you least expect them." Caldwell nodded, but the lingering unease remained. There was something about the cage that didn't sit right with him, something that still tugged at the edges of his thoughts. He had seen the manifestation of his father, but he hadn't truly understood what it meant. What had brought his father to the cage in the first place? Why had it called to him? And why had it done the same to Caldwell? The answers, he knew, lay somewhere in the past, but he wasn't sure he was ready to face it again. The next few days passed in a blur. Caldwell threw himself into his work at the club, trying to push the lingering shadows from his mind. But no matter how much he focused on the present, the past kept resurfacing. The whispering voice that had haunted him still echoed in his mind, though now it was more distant, more muffled. It was as if the cage had merely quieted the noise, but it hadn't completely eradicated it. Poirot, as always, was a patient observer. He kept a careful distance, allowing Caldwell to work through his thoughts without pushing him too hard. But it was clear to the detective that the true resolution had not yet arrived. The mystery was still alive, and it was only a matter of time before it would present itself once more. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Caldwell found himself standing alone in the club's main hall. The rest of the guests had long since retired, and the building was quiet, the soft sounds of footsteps and murmurs a distant memory. He felt a strange pull, as though something in the air had shifted. He had been feeling it for days, but now, standing in the silence of the hall, he couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was calling to him, beckoning him to return to the cage, to face whatever it was that had been left behind. He walked through the dimly lit corridors, the walls closing in around him as he approached the room where the cage had been kept. When he arrived, he found the door slightly ajar, as though someone had been there before him. A sense of unease washed over him, but he couldn't stop now. Something inside him told him that he had to know. He had to understand the final piece of the puzzle. With a deep breath, he pushed open the door. Inside, the cage stood as it had before, gleaming in the dim light, but this time there was something different about it. The golden bars seemed to shimmer more brightly, almost as if they were alive, reacting to Caldwell's presence. He stepped closer, and the air in the room grew thick with tension. And then he heard it, a faint whisper just at the edge of his hearing. It was the voice again, but this time it was not the same voice as before. It was deeper, more menacing, and it seemed to come from within the cage itself. Caldwell froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel his hands begin to shake, but he didn't step back. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, as though the cage was speaking to him directly. "You are not free, Caldwell. You cannot escape." The words seemed to hang in the air, their meaning sinking deep into his mind. It was then that Caldwell realized he had been chasing the wrong thing all along. The cage, the curse, the whispers, they weren't just about his father or his family. They were about him. He had been trying to escape himself. He had been trying to outrun his own fears, his own regrets, but the cage had been a reflection of what he hadn't faced. The truth wasn't just about uncovering his family's secrets. It was about confronting the darkness within himself. He turned, his eyes wide with realization, and saw Poirot standing in the doorway, watching him with a knowing look in his eyes. "Monsieur," Poirot said gently, his voice steady but filled with understanding, "you are not here to solve the mystery. You are here to understand the truth about yourself." Caldwell's breath caught in his throat. I don't know what to do anymore." Poirot took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "You do not need to run, monsieur. You need only to face the truth of who you are. The cage was never your enemy. You are." Caldwell stood there, his mind racing, as the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The cage was not his prison. He was. And now, at last, he was ready to set himself free. Chapter 9. The Price of Freedom. Caldwell stood motionless before the gilded cage, the weight of his realization pressing down on him. Poirot's words had struck a deep chord within him. It had never been about solving the mystery of his father's disappearance, nor about the cage or its twisted legacy. It had been about understanding the darkness within himself, the fears and regrets that had kept him shackled to a past he could no longer control. The detective's presence beside him was a steady anchor in the whirlwind of emotions that raged within Caldwell. He had been running from himself for so long, chasing shadows and half-truths, but now he stood at the threshold of a new reality, one where he could no longer ignore what had been buried deep inside. "I've spent so many years trying to outrun it," Caldwell murmured, his voice hollow. "The guilt, the fear, the uncertainty. I thought if I just understood what happened, if I uncovered the truth, it would set me free. But it never did. It only made it worse." Poirot gave him a knowing look. "The truth, monsieur, is not an answer to be found in external places. It is a journey inward. Only when you confront your own darkness can you truly break free from its grip." Caldwell clenched his fists, fighting back the rush of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. It felt like a lifetime ago that he had first stepped into this club, driven by a need to understand the mystery of his family's past. But that journey had brought him face to face with something far more difficult than he had ever imagined: the truth about himself. "You're right," Caldwell said, his voice steadier now. "It's me I've been avoiding. I've been afraid of facing who I am, of accepting the things I've done, the things I've failed to do." Poirot's gaze softened. "It is never easy, monsieur, but the first step is always the hardest. You are stronger than you think." Caldwell took a deep breath, the air around him feeling heavier with every passing moment. He had come to a crossroads, and there was no turning back now. The cage, with its golden bars and its haunting influence, had been his prison, but it had also been the mirror through which he had seen himself. He could no longer deny the truth that lay within him. The whispering voice, which had haunted him for so long, was silent now, but the echoes of its presence lingered in the stillness of the room. Caldwell looked at Poirot, the last of his doubts, fading. "What now? What do I do with this?" Poirot gave a small but encouraging smile. "You do what must be done. You face yourself, monsieur. The cage is not your enemy, but the key to your liberation. If you can accept who you are, if you can forgive yourself for the past, you will be free." Caldwell nodded, though a part of him still felt a deep reluctance. The past had shaped him, yes, but it also threatened to swallow him whole. He had to let go of the memories, the guilt, the shadow of his father's obsession. But it was harder than Poirot made it sound, and yet Caldwell knew, deep down, that he had no choice. The alternative was to remain bound to the cage, to continue carrying the weight of the past until it crushed him. "I don't know if I can forgive myself," he admitted, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "I don't know if I can ever be free of the things I've done, the things I've lost." Poirot's eyes shone with quiet compassion. "Forgiveness is not a gift you give to others, monsieur. It is a gift you give to yourself. To release yourself from the burden of guilt, you must first understand that you are human, that you are fallible, just like everyone else. You will never be free if you continue to carry the weight of perfection." Caldwell closed his eyes, taking in the depth of Poirot's words. He had spent so long trying to be perfect, trying to undo the mistakes of his past. But now, standing here in this room filled with the echoes of his family's secrets, he understood. Perfection was an illusion, and as long as he clung to it, he would remain trapped. The moment stretched on, the air thick with the weight of Caldwell's internal struggle. He could feel the presence of the cage, its gleaming bars now a reflection of his own inner turmoil. It had held him captive for so long, but now it was no longer the cage that needed to be unlocked. It was himself. Suddenly, as if in response to this realization, the cage shuddered, its golden bars rattling slightly. Caldwell stepped back instinctively, but Poirot remained calm, his eyes never leaving the cage. "It seems the cage is no longer necessary, monsieur. It has fulfilled its purpose." The sound of the rattling bars grew louder, and then, with a soft hiss, the cage began to dissolve, its once pristine structure crumbling into nothingness. Caldwell watched in stunned silence as the golden frame faded into the air, leaving behind nothing but the cold, empty space where it had once stood. For a long moment there was silence. Then, with a deep breath, Caldwell exhaled, the weight of the room lifting as the cage disappeared completely. He turned to Poirot, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and relief. "It's gone," Caldwell whispered. "It's really gone." Poirot gave a small nod. "The cage was never your enemy, monsieur. It was simply a reflection of what you had yet to release. Now that you have faced it, there is nothing left to bind you." Caldwell stood there, the silence of the room settling around him, and for the first time in years he felt at peace. The past, with all its pain and regret, had been exorcised from his soul. He had confronted the darkness within himself, and now there was only the present. "Thank you, Poirot," Caldwell said, his voice steady. "You've helped me more than I could have ever imagined." Poirot smiled, a twinkle of warmth in his eyes. "It was you, monsieur, who did the hard work. I merely guided you to the truth." Caldwell nodded, his mind finally clear. He had done it. He had faced the truth of who he was, and in doing so, he had set himself free. The cage was no longer a part of him, nor was the shadow of his father's obsession. All that remained was the future he would now shape for himself, unburdened by the weight of the past. As the two men stood in the quiet room, the echoes of the cage's influence slowly faded, leaving only the promise of a new beginning. It was a beginning Caldwell had fought for, and one he had earned. The case was closed, but Caldwell knew that the journey he had begun was just the beginning of something far greater. Chapter 10. The Final Revelation. The morning sun poured through the large windows of the club's grand hall, casting soft rays of golden light across the polished floors. It was the kind of morning that promised a fresh start, the kind that Caldwell had not dared hope for until recently. The weight of the past had lifted, but the future remained uncertain. Yet, as he sat across from Hercule Poirot, his thoughts felt clearer than they had in years. Caldwell had come a long way in a short time. He had faced the darkness of his family's legacy, confronted the horrors of the gilded cage, and uncovered the truth about the fears that had haunted him for so long. But as he now sat, the questions that had first brought him to Poirot's doorstep had all but faded. The case was, for all intents and purposes, solved. And yet something lingered in the back of his mind, an uneasy feeling that the final piece of the puzzle had yet to fall into place. "Monsieur Poirot," Caldwell began, his voice calm but laden with thought, "you've helped me uncover so much. I know what I have to do now. I know how to move forward, but—" Poirot, as always, sat with a gentle smile, his hands folded neatly in front of him on the table. His piercing eyes watched Caldwell with unwavering focus. "Ah, monsieur, I sense a question yet unanswered. You have come far, but there is still something in your mind, yes?" Caldwell nodded slowly. "I thought I'd resolved it all. My father's disappearance, the cage, the guilt I carried for so long. But there's a part of me that feels as though something else was left unsaid, something important. I can't help but feel there's more to the story. What was the true nature of that voice in the cage? Why did it come to me at all? And why now? Was it just a product of my mind, or is there something deeper at play here?" Poirot's gaze softened, and for a moment he was quiet, considering Caldwell's words carefully. He had seen the transformation in the man, the way he had grown from a tormented soul to someone now standing on the brink of a new beginning. And yet Poirot understood that the mind, once unsettled, could not rest until it had all the answers. "Ah, monsieur, your instincts are sharp, as they always have been," Poirot said after a pause. "You have done well to confront your past, to release yourself from its grip. But there is something you must understand, something that you may not have realized fully yet." Caldwell leaned forward, eager for the clarity he sought. "What do you mean? What's left to understand?" Poirot folded his hands together, a calm but knowing expression on his face. "The cage, monsieur, was never truly about your father. It was about you. You see, the mind is a powerful thing, much more powerful than we sometimes give it credit for. The voice you heard, the presence you felt, was not merely a supernatural manifestation. It was the culmination of everything you feared about yourself. Your father's obsession, his disappearance, the cage, it was all a reflection of your own inner turmoil. The cage served as a mirror to the fears you had buried deep within your psyche." Caldwell stared at Poirot, the detective's words sinking in like a weight in his chest. "You mean it was all in my head?" "Not all, monsieur," Poirot replied, "but much of it. The cage was not an external force. It was a construct of your mind, a physical representation of your own emotional imprisonment. Your father may have been drawn to it, but it was you who allowed it to take root in your life." Caldwell sat back, his mind reeling. So, the cage wasn't some kind of curse or possession? It wasn't a relic of some dark family secret? Poirot shook his head. "No, monsieur. It was a symbol of your unresolved guilt and fear, passed down from one generation to the next. The true curse was not the object itself, but the way it distorted your perception of reality. Your father's obsession with it, his disappearance. It was not so much about the cage as it was about what he could not face within himself. Caldwell absorbed this revelation slowly, trying to piece it together. But if it was all in my head, why did I feel like I was being controlled? Why did I hear that voice, feel the presence of something dark? Because, monsieur, the mind can create powerful illusions, Poirot explained. Your father's influence, his unresolved fears, and your own hidden insecurities combined to form a very real, very vivid manifestation in the form of the cage. It was a creation of your mind, not an external force. You heard the voice because you were listening for it, because you were subconsciously drawing it out from your own deepest fears. Caldwell shook his head, still struggling to grasp the full implications of Poirot's words. But why didn't I realize that sooner? Why did it take so long to understand? Poirot's expression softened with understanding. Because, monsieur, the mind often hides the truth from itself, out of fear of what it might uncover. The cage was not a simple object. It was a manifestation of everything you were too afraid to confront. It was only when you allowed yourself to face your own inner demons that the truth began to reveal itself. Caldwell sat in stunned silence, his thoughts racing. The truth, so simple yet so complex, was finally clear. The cage had never been a literal prison, nor had it been a curse. It had been a symbol, a powerful projection of his own fears and unresolved emotions. The voice had not come from some dark force, but from within him. And yet, despite the revelations, Caldwell felt a sense of peace wash over him. The past no longer held its power over him. The cage, the voice, the guilt, these were all constructs of his own making. And now that he understood that, they had lost their grip on him. Poirot watched, him with quiet patience, as he processed this newfound understanding. You are free now, Monsieur Caldwell. Free from the cage, free from the past, and free from the shadows of your own mind. The cage was never your enemy. It was simply a reflection of what you needed to confront in order to move forward. Caldwell exhaled slowly, a sense of calm settling over him. He had faced the darkest parts of himself and come out the other side. The cage was gone, its influence extinguished, and the road ahead was open to him. "Thank you, Poirot," Caldwell said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how I would have done this without you." Poirot smiled, the warmth in, his eyes reflecting his quiet pride. "It was you, monsieur, who did the hard work. I merely pointed the way. You have freed yourself, and that is no small feat." Caldwell nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders as he looked toward the future. The past was behind him, and with it, the cage that had bound him for so long. As the two men sat in the quiet room, the sun rising higher in the sky, Caldwell knew that the journey had come to an end. But this was not the end of his story. Too was the beginning of something new. A life unburdened by the past, a future shaped by the choices he would make. For the first time in years, he felt truly free.